Hey there, it's Ryan and Victoria Cole with another episode of Needed Conversations. We're in the middle of a series called Naked and Unashamed, and we're talking all things intimacy. This has been a great series, and today we're continuing the conversation by discussing the gap in marriage, the distance that couples can have between one another. We're talking about long distance relationships, maybe married couples who have jobs that keep them away from one another for long periods of time. But then in particular, we're talking about that emotional distance that couples have, or the sexual distance, and how to close that gap. That's the strategies we're going to give you, along with some revelation that we've gotten from the Bible as we've studied this morning. And we know it's going to bless you. But before we jump into that conversation, Victoria, what do we have for them?
Yeah, for the month of February, we want to be your marriage resource. So we created a bundle, 2 ebooks that you can download right now and start going through either together or individually. And it's really going to help you to build a strong foundation for your personal relationship with God, but also your relationship with your spouse. One of the books is called Spicy Sex, which I think is one of the most popular ones amongst men and women, particularly men, because it's short read, but it's a really incredible resource. We've already had so much feedback from people reading this book and how it has helped their intimacy, not only physically, but also emotionally and spiritually. But also our other book called I Love You More, Most, and Forever. It's also an incredible resource. So you can pick up both of those books. It's a bundle for a very low price just for this month at moremostforever.com.
Yeah, and the link is in the description below. And hey, while you're there, make sure you like and subscribe to this channel if you're on YouTube, or make sure you follow our podcast and give us a rating. Also, remember, we are a nonprofit ministry. It's called Empowered Culture Ministries, and that's exactly what we do. We're called to help empower culture, bringing the culture of heaven to the world. And we do that first and foremost through marriage. Marriage is the engine of society. And so that's why we've invested so much time and energy in providing resources, writing books on this topic, how you can grow spiritually, how you can discover your purpose. So go to moremostforever.com and become a partner. Give monthly, as little as $10 or less. Every dollar counts, or give one time, whatever you feel led to do. Ask God, how can I support Ryan and Victoria in their mission to empower couples? We're counseling them. We're pouring into them. We're planning workshops and events. More details of those things are going to come out here in the next few weeks, especially if you're in the upstate of South Carolina. We're planning some marriage nights, and then ultimately leading to a marriage retreat in the fall that's going to be really impactful. So you're going to want to stay tuned for all that. Go to moremostforever.com for all of the details. So we're talking about being naked and unashamed. We're talking about intimacy. But today, as we were thinking about what this episode should be on, we started going through the book of Song of Solomon. Now, we talk about this book in our book, Spicy Sex, because obviously it's the go-to book in the Bible when people want to talk about sex and, how it describes this intimate relationship between this man and woman, the desire that they have for one another. They even describe in poetic ways some of the acts that they want to and eventually engage in, which kind of gives us an understanding of some of those physical things that are appropriate for a marriage. All of those spicy details are laid out in our book. But then today, when we started looking at the outline of this entire book, I believe that there's more there than meets the eye. And really, the story of this couple reflects a lot of our relationships that we have with our spouse, because this book is not just about the beautiful, flowery parts of the relationship. They actually experience conflict as well. Yes, they express their love and affection for each other, but there are a few moments in the text where conflict and tension are mentioned. For example, Song of Songs 5, 2-6, the woman describes a dream where she is looking for her beloved but cannot find him. She goes out into the streets and is beaten by the watchmen for her search. When she finally finds her beloved, she is angry with him for not being there when she needed him, and they have a brief argument. However, the couple quickly reconciles and expresses their love for each other once again. And then there's some other scriptures that we're going to go into as well, but When we read that little piece this morning, it stood out to us, Victoria, right? Mm-hmm. Why did that stand out?
Well, it's interesting because it says that she went out there looking for him, and maybe that was physically true, that maybe he was away somewhere. But I think this was a dream that she had, and it's so often that in our relationship we experience the same thing where our spouse lives with us, but we feel so disconnected, whether it's emotionally or spiritually. There's just something there. And we have talked a lot about this, that a female is a prophetic voice in the household. Not to say that a man cannot recognize when there's a disconnection, but I think that's what God instills in a female to really sense, because we are very relational. We are very emotionally in tune. And I think men are very hyper-focused whenever they're on a task or a job. And so I think that's what God gives us in our DNA as women, to be more emotionally in tune, where we sense that there's some kind of a disconnection. There's something going on, and we're searching for a spouse, even though they're sitting right next to us in our bed, but for some reason we are disconnected. So how can we find that connection back to each other, where we actually feel supported, feel affirmed, and feel like we're working together as a partner, instead of you do your own thing, I do my own thing, and we're just kind of like ships passing in the night?
Yeah, and we speak to couples who have physical separation. You know, they might have job responsibilities. For instance, it could be truckers who spend weeks away from their spouses, people who travel and do work trips. I know I do that, and sometimes that can be a strain. If I'm off doing a ministry assignment and Victoria's here with the kids, or, you know, or it could be something as simple as your husband or your wife works night shift, and trying to find that balance between they've got to sleep during the day, yet we've got to have this functional life. And those rhythms in the relationship can be very hard to manage, and it can create this emotional distance between the couple. But let's be real too. There are couples who have very regular schedules and they're with each other a lot of the times, but they don't feel connected. They feel like that there's a Grand Canyon between them and their spouse. And I think that this is what this scripture is talking about, because she says it's a dream. There are, in fact, two different instances where the woman in the text is having this longing. One, it's where her man is off on a planned trip, and so she knows that he's coming back, and she longs to be with him. And sometimes this separation can be good. It can drive some passion in the relationship, a longing to be with the other person. But then it's clear in chapter 5 where she's having a dream, and this dream isn't necessarily reflective of her waking life, but she is having this dream about searching up and down the streets. And we've all had these nightmares, right? Have you ever been running in a dream, yet you feel like you're not moving?
Yeah.
Like you're running, but you can't move fast enough, or someone's chasing you. And you can imagine the terror that she feels searching these streets. She's a woman. She's being beaten by these watchers, these watchmen in the streets for even going out there and searching. And she's got this frustration because when she finds him, it's like he didn't have as much concern about the fact that he was quote unquote lost that she had. And so they have this argument, and then they reconcile. And so we see, whether that was thousands of years ago and now today, we all experience that emotional disconnect where it's like you're in the same room with your spouse, but there might as well be 10,000 miles between you. So how do you bring that gap together? Well, number one, you have to talk about it. You have to communicate it just like we see that they did. And you have to be clear about your emotions, that you feel disconnected, but you can't also be driven by your emotions. One of the guys, Mike Anthony, he's a motivational speaker that lives next to us here in Greenville. And he talks about your emotions a lot. One of the things that stands out is the fact that your emotions shouldn't drive you, but you shouldn't ignore your emotions either, because your emotions are telling you something. They're key indicators. Maybe there's something physically or mentally that's going on, or maybe there's something emotionally that needs to be addressed, a distance between you and another person, or a frustration that you have that needs to be expressed. So you can't hide from those emotions. I'm talking to the men here too. You can't run from those conversations, because it's going to build up and build up and build up until it becomes this nuclear explosion in your marriage because you've ignored it for so long. I think that we were talking about this earlier, that there are clear seasons that marriages go through where there are, work intensive things that drive your focus. You have kids, you don't have as much expendable time as you did, but ultimately you've got to prioritize the relationship, and you've got to say to yourself, and I wrote this down today, is this a season or is this a bad cycle that needs to be confronted? If it's a season like they experienced, he's going off on a trip, she's longing for him, you can leverage that separation to kind of build this intensity between you and your spouse. But if it's a cycle, if it has nothing to do with we've both agreed that you're going off to do this, and after a certain period of time, yes, we're going to be focused over here, but we're going to come together, we're going to have a date, we're going to go on a trip, we're going to spend some alone time together. If it's not intentional separation and it's a toxic cycle, you got to confront that thing.
It's when another spouse decides to leave and escape in order to not to confront the actual conversation or whatever it is that they're going through. They want to escape to their friend's house or their mom's house or whatever, and that's dysfunctional, especially if you have not set a separation and you've communicated, said, we need time alone, If that's your escape route, that's definitely not a positive way of, you go in your separate way and maybe you guys need time. That's a really toxic cycle that you guys will definitely continue to repeat if it's not addressed.
That's one of the questions a lot of couples ask us who are struggling. They say, do you think that it's biblical for a husband and wife to separate? And what are your thoughts? There's not really any clear indication apart from one scripture that talks about abstaining from sex to fast and pray. So that's really our only reference point. But this is what I know to be true, and statistics can back this up, is that subconscious or spontaneous separation is never a good idea. Mm-hmm. So if you are subconsciously distancing yourself from your spouse, like you said, to avoid a conversation, or if you have spontaneously, in the act of rage or anger or frustration, you said, I'm going to stay over here and I don't want anything to do with you, and I'm ignoring their calls, that nothing productive can come from that. Because the enemy is going to corner you in isolation and get inside of your head and put people in your path that affirm this toxic energy that you have towards your spouse. But what I can say that does work is intentional separation for a designated period of time where you say, listen, this just isn't working, but we are going to figure out how to make it work, because divorce should not be at the forefront of your mind. Mm-hmm. But you might need a time apart for a couple days, maybe even as long as a week or so, to go to a safe space where you're not trying to get the opinions of another person, but you said, no, we are going to agree to go fast and pray and lay our opinions, lay our selfishness on the altar, and we are going to come back at this specific date, at this specific time, and we are going to have a productive conversation. You might go and write in journals and come back together and express some of those frustrations, but ultimately you're coming back together to forge a new path forward, not to regurgitate all of the other things. Obviously, some things have to be addressed, but ultimately you don't just want to keep going around the same mountain. You want to be able to clearly articulate the frustrations that you have and say, what is this mutual way that we can cooperate out of it, that we can work together to get out of it?
Yeah, and then also to address the seasons of intense work. I think for us, what has been working too is we would just keep going and going and going, and we wouldn't even recognize that it's an intensive work season, and then whenever it would actually come to a head where we would have an argument or an issue, we start seeing that this was actually just a work-intensive season, and we just both didn't recognize it. We didn't say, hey, I know this is a work-intensive season. What are you feeling? This is temporary. How can I support you? Because truth be told, both of us are really working hard, but I think if it's not acknowledged or addressed, or you don't have the time to even sit down at the table, I'm not even saying set aside a date time to go out on a date, have your kids be washed by somebody, because I know that's not everybody's thing. They're not able to get a sitter, or maybe they just have a really work intensive season. But just to even set aside time to acknowledge to your spouse, hey, I know that we've been really working hard, and let's set something aside that we can look forward to, because we know this is temporary. This is not going to be something that we're going to be stuck in. And I think a lot of parents that are young, that have like younger children, that can be very hard, because you can feel like you're doing the same thing over and over again. I know when I was a stay-at-home mom, that was very difficult, because you literally feel like everything has shifted. You're in a new season, and you're doing repetitive things, and sometimes you fail to recognize that you're doing, good work, or you're working hard because you're just so restless at night. But then you also get up and you're not like going physically to work. You're actually nurturing a child, and that can kind of drive you to distance yourself from your spouse, because your spouse could be focused on their job and they could be working long hours to try to support your family, because now you have a one income household. So overly communicating that, and that's what I love how Ryan says it, creating an altar in your house where your dining table is that altar, that you set aside your media, your phones, your tablets, and you have those conversations, and you'll be surprised how great conversations can come out of it just because you are having dinner together. You don't have to set, a specific time or leave the house, but you can come together at that table and just say, hey, how are you? How can I support you? And, what can we look forward to? So just overly communicating that, I think really will go a long way in supporting each other through those seasons and through those times where maybe you'll come out on the other side and you'll really recognize, wow, we are stronger for it because we went through such a hard season and it was difficult, but I feel like I have a partner that has my back.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're letting you in, as a voyeur into our relationship, because what Victoria is saying is what we live.
Yeah.
And that's not even to say you're going to have your life perfectly outlined, to say, we are going to work for 3 months on this project, and then when we get done, we are going to go on a trip to Australia, and we're going to bask in each other's presence again. Because it's not as pretty and organized as that. We know, especially if you are people of faith, that every single day might be questionable. We're in ministry, we're entrepreneurs, we're trying to navigate all of these things at the same time. And sometimes we get tunnel vision and we only see the work that we're doing and we don't recognize the work that our spouse is doing. And then we may not have a time that we know that this weight is going to lift, but we know it's going to lift at some point. But we're both praying together, we're trusting God together and saying, every step, every day that we have together, we're going to be intentional in some aspect to turn our face from the work that's ahead of us and turn our face towards our spouse and communicate and talk. Another thing that I saw that this couple does in Song of Solomon is that they had to let go of the opinions of others. Mm-hmm. You have to build the kind of marriage that you guys want, not the kind of marriage that you think everyone expects you to have. Victoria and I have these conversations as well about what other people have, what we have, what other people's callings are, what our calling is. And sometimes it's hard for us to swallow that we are called and in this certain way, and that our life is going to look a little bit different from everybody else's. And that has to be okay. We have to let go of those traditional and cultural expectations and say yes to the Lord. For this particular couple in the Song of Solomon, they were struggling with the opinions of their family. This girl's brothers, for whatever reason, didn't quite like this guy. And so she had to deal with that. They had to deal with the family drama. But ultimately, they unified in their vision for what they wanted to accomplish together as a couple. And this sparked passion between them. They united in a covenant of marriage, and they were able to overcome the opinions of others to build the kind of marriage that they really wanted. Does that make sense?
Yes, for sure.
So you have to ask yourself, what opinions are driving our marriage? Do we really have an outline for the kind of relationship that we want to design? Because the marriage that you have is the marriage that you've cultivated. I say this to husbands in particular because we look at Ephesians. We talked about this in our episode on submission, that the kind of wife is the kind of wife you cultivate. I say this to husbands because we are to wash our wives with the water of the word. We're to present a vision for her, and we're to help guide her emotionally and connecting to her on that level while she's respecting us, while she's submitted to our leadership. But we've got to give her something to submit to. But we're designing this marriage in a way that we want it to be. Obviously, we have a prototype in the Bible. We have these scriptures about marriage and the role of men and women, but there are no two marriages that are alike. There are some foundational elements that we can't touch, but outside of that, we have different careers. We have a different number of kids than other people. We live in a different city, in a different country. There are people who deal with crisis that leads to immigration from one country to another. Their marriage is going to go through a different set of challenges. They have to determine what success looks like for them. We have to determine what success looks like for us. What do you got, Victoria?
Yeah, well, just when we were talking about this, Psalms of Solomon, one other scripture came to mind is Revelations 2:4. It says, "Yet I hold this against you, have lost the love you had at first." And then it talks about realize how far you have fallen, repent, and do the works you did at first. And when I kind of looked through the commentary of that, it was interesting because it's like addressing, your salvation. When you first came to Christ, you were kind of, newly in the faith, and it was exciting to experience the life of faith and what God has for you. You're really just overwhelmed by grace. And then over time, what happens is like you become stagnant. And this is the same thing in our marriage. Oftentimes we're so infatuated with one another during the dating phase and then maybe the first year. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I even don't like when people bash on the young couples that go through that, because it's a beautiful season. I love that season. But the thing that we have to keep in mind is that we can't drag that same season into who we are today, because the truth is that we have grown, and that's what God wants us to do also. He wants us to mature. As we mature in our faith, that we are to now become teachers, right? So we now have to take up the cross and follow Christ even through the challenging times. And it's the same thing in your marriage. I think it's good to remember those times of infatuation, but I think one of the reels that you created is about desire, is that you are responsible and you cultivate that desire. I don't even know how you said it, but it was so eloquently said. What was the statement that you said about desire?
Yeah, that you are in control of the desire that you have towards your spouse. We think that it is some passive or uncontrollable thing, that like it's an urge.
Yeah.
But if you set your affections on your spouse, the desire will come. So make sure you're following us on Instagram. If you're not, at More Most Forever, we got some awesome reels that we just throw some nuggets out there in like 90 seconds or less.
It's definitely thought-provoking,
Yes.
And it's really going to help you and motivate you in your marriage to really think through certain things that you guys believe and stand on.
Yeah, when we go to this book, Song of Songs, we're not just going there for the spicy, salacious details of their love affair. We're looking at how to extract some principles. So even looking at it chapter to chapter, we see this tug of war, this back and forth tension, but it comes down to viewing each other rightly that stirs and awakens this passion between them and closes the gap. Chapter 1, the woman expresses her love and her longing for her beloved, who is described as a shepherd. She compares their love to the beauty of nature, using images of flowers and gardens to convey their passion. So we see right off the bat, even before they go into the details of their physical longings, the woman sees him as a capable man. She sees him not as this beautiful Greek statuesque figure. Mm-hmm. She sees him as a shepherd. And she looks and says, this man has capacity to be my husband. And even when you are looking at your spouse, we want to cultivate all of these physical, chemistry, butterflies, you name it. But it first starts in how you view your spouse in their spiritual and emotional capacity in your life. And do you view them rightly? Do you frame them rightly in your mind? Do you see them? Let's just say that they aren't 100% that, but you can see the potential that they have. I'm sure he had flaws too, because they had arguments over his flaws. And to be honest, at one point, she grows discontent in her affection for him. And I think it's because in chapters 4 and 5, they become consumed physically and they lose sight of, wait a minute, you're more to me than a body. You're more to me than a sexual experience. You are my shepherd. You're my husband. And he sees her as, you're my wife. You're my bride. You're not just a sexual encounter. You are my bride, my other half.
And it's interesting that the first chapter, she expresses her love and she says that he's like the shepherd. And to me, the shepherd and the sheep, it confirms that one of the needs of woman is security.
Yeah.
Because the shepherd really is the one who shepherds the sheep and he protects them and he shields them. And so that's so incredible that this confirms once again that women do need security. And
you see it goes down in chapters 3, and he goes off and goes on a work trip, and it's planned. And so he is consumed by his work, but she still has this longing emotionally. And that's typical of the male-female dynamic, is men can put their heads to the ground and really be consumed by what they do. But women want that emotional balance way more than men do. And she expresses that frustration, and they find their way back to one another again. But one of the scriptures that stands out to me is one that I quote all of the time, which is Song of Songs 2:15. The woman expresses concern about what she calls little foxes that damage the vineyards. And that suggests that there are some minor issues or conflict that can really harm the relationship if left unchecked, even more so than some dramatic events in a relationship. If you look at the divorce and reasons why people divorce, in this country in particular, it's irreconcilable differences. Well, what are those irreconcilable differences? Is it that you just didn't want to list them out? It's easy to say it was an affair, they committed adultery and I don't want to be with them anymore. And sometimes that's listed on there. But really, when it comes down to it, the breakdown of marriages are because of a lot of little micro reasons that build up because they're unaddressed. They could be financial problems, those things that are small, unspoken of. You're slowly going into debt because you're not having conversations about your money. It could be sexual dysfunctions. It could be you've poured all of your time into your kids and have forsaken prioritizing your marriage. All of these little things add up. And as she says in chapter 2, verse 15, to other young women, she's speaking to other young women, probably from experience. She's like, I saw him as a shepherd. We have this physical thing going on, but I recognize that there's some small foxes in this relationship that I've got to look out for, because right when the love comes into full bloom, it literally says in Song of Songs chapter 2, and I want to read it. It says starting in chapter 2, verse 14, she says, my dove is hiding behind the rocks, behind an outcrop on the cliff. Let me see your face. Let me hear your voice, for your voice is pleasant and your face is lovely. That was the young man speaking. And now, young women of Jerusalem, this is who is speaking. Catch all the foxes, those little foxes, before they ruin the vineyard of love, for the grapevines are blossoming. And then the young woman comes back and says, my lover is mine and I am his. He browses among the lilies. Before the dawn breezes blow and the night shadows flee. Return to me, my love, like a gazelle or a young stag on the rugged mountains. So we see sort of this recognition of this separation. Then there's this voice of wisdom that comes. It says, catch those small foxes before they ruin the vineyard of love, for the grapevines are blossoming. So it's like you can have this explosive physical passion for one another and begin to allow these small foxes to begin eating away at that a little bit at a time. And before you know it, not only has the physical chemistry waned, but you look and you say, where's the person that I married? Mm-hmm. I don't recognize this person. And so then you have to come back together with a pursuit and build up what is really the most important part of your relationship, that spiritual and soulful aspects, in order to reignite the physical. I hope that makes sense too. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, and like Ryan said, yielding and yearning for your spouse is healthy, even with this person going on a work trip and this woman is still looking for him and yearning for your spouse. I think that yearning is there because you are pursuing intentionally that person. I think if you are distracted by, work or other things, then you're not even thinking about your spouse. And then when you guys are together, then you're always nitpicking what it is that your spouse is doing. But I think that yearning for your spouse is healthy. We've even talked about this in our book called Spicy Sex, where we broke down the acronym SPICY, where the Y in the spicy word is yearning and yielding. And it's a cycle. It's something that, you go, it's like an ebb and flow in your seasons where you have some
can't yearn unless you yield.
Yeah. And it's incredible. That's just how God created us, for us to submit to one another, where we are on the mission together through the seasons of hardships and challenges, where you actually experience, that ride of the wave like the surfer is. And then sometimes the tide rolls back. And then sometimes you do question things. And sometimes you do have to address certain things and sit down together and say, hey, I feel this way. Why do you think I feel this way? Help me understand what we're going through, or what our thought process is, or what we need to do in the season. And again, it's building that altar in your home, sitting at the table, even have dinner together and having that open conversation about your feelings and emotions, and even overly communicating that. I think is going to really help you to push you through the work intensive seasons, or even the challenging times that you may be experiencing right now.
Yeah. So let's recap a little bit, because we're looking at Song of Solomon, not just for the interesting sexual tidbits that we can extract, but more so looking at this dynamic relationship that was filled with intensity, both sexually, but also some conflict as well. They experienced distance between them. And how can you, if you're experiencing distance in your marriage, close the gap? Number one, let go of the opinions of others. Mm-hmm. So many times we're striving to try to have the relationship we expect other people. So many times we try to build a relationship that we know that other people expect us to have, instead of building a relationship that's custom made for our calling and our unique set of personalities. So you have to build the kind of marriage both of you want, not what other people expect you to have. Number two, look at the distance between you. Is it because you are in a work-intensive season? Is it a temporary thing? If so, you're going to have to set a goal to look forward to say, after we move through this season, this is what we're going to do to refocus on one another. You're going to have to do everything in your power to keep that commitment as well. So you say, after I finish school or finish this semester, or after I finish this project at work, we are going to go on a date, or we're going to focus on one another for a weekend, whatever that looks like for you to refocus on one another and have some meaningful conversations. You've got to commit to it. But if that separation isn't intentional, if it's subconscious or it was spontaneous, you've got to say, this is not just a season. This is a bad cycle that needs to be confronted. And you've got to look at your bad habits, look at your lack of discipline, and look at every underlying dysfunction, something that might be hidden that you're afraid to address in the relationship. Maybe you're shameful about something that you did. You got to confront that thing head on. And then you've got to say, what are the things that are distracting us in our relationship? And you've got to deal with it and build a strategy to move yourselves out of that place. And it comes with changing the way that you think. Bad habits do not die quickly. You've got to replace them with other meaningful habits in order for those to become secondary in your life. It's not just about focusing on stopping a thing, in as much as it's, initiating new healthy patterns in the relationship. I know that was a lot, but I hope that you got something out of this message today. If you did, would you consider becoming a partner with Empowered Culture Ministries? Go to moremostforever.com, give a donation of any amount, or better yet, become a monthly partner and help us to reach those couples who don't have this knowledge accessible to them, so that we can build more content, to distribute it widely, to run ads, which we're doing on some of our content, to reach people who aren't hearing this message on a day-to-day basis, who don't have parents who have this kind of wisdom. Some of the people that we talk to there, the majority of people, they come from broken homes, parents who've been married multiple times. They don't have a visible pattern to mirror their marriage after, a healthy pattern. We're providing that to them, but we need your support in order to put more of our focus here so that we are not distracted on other entrepreneurial endeavors. Yes, we love entrepreneurship, but you know what our real passion is? To help families, to help couples build marriages that are lasting, so that they can duplicate a healthy pattern to their children. They can discover their purpose together. They can have an environment of the kingdom in their home. All of that sounds wonderful, but it can't happen without resources. Become a partner today. And while you're at it, pick up that marriage bundle. It's only $10. You get 2 ebooks. They're full-length books. These aren't little books, but they're palatable. They're easy to move through because we've structured them in such a way. So go to moremostforever.com. Smash that subscribe button on YouTube. Spread the word about this podcast. Hit the share button. Final words, Victoria?
Yeah, give us a review as well. That really helps us to spread the word. And listen, I do this same thing. I actually re-listen, rewatch our own episodes because I'm learning as well. But if I feel like somebody that I know needs to hear something, I send them actual link to the podcast as well. And that, I'm sure that's going to encourage them and help them in their walk, whether it's in their marriage or in walk with the Lord. So make sure to do that. These are free resources, and we want to continue to provide those resources for you. So stay tuned. Help us to spread the word by liking, by subscribing, by giving us a review, a 5-star rating, hopefully. And we will see you guys next week on our next episode here on Needed Conversations. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. If you need any kind of help or support, you can text us. The number's there below, 864-428-7131. We're here for you, and we'll see you next week. God bless.